Nisar Sahab, Professor Masoodi Sahab, Professor Baba Sahab, with whom I have a special relationship, I should say. Professor Malik, Professor Farooq Sahab, and Professor Hussain Sahab. My sisters and brothers this side, Professor Tabassum. I am forgetting the name of my other sister, Dr. Raviji, your deputy registrar here. All the research scholars, invited guests, faculty, my dearest student and friend, Dr. Fayaz, sitting here, my esteemed dean here, Professor Yusuf Saab, who is also my brother because we belong to same area. A very well-known academician. I am reminded of when I saw Nisar Saab, I am looking at his face right now, but I remember with grey sweater, which he used maybe 30, 40 years back when I was a student here, and would always be busy in working and doing research. Then when I used to go out from here, be it JNU, the top economist is there, be it Usmania University, be it even outside the country, Nisar Saab is very, very well known for his subject. I think there are multiple planning commissions. We are all proud of him because he has made this, not only this region, he has made whole country proud because of his writings, because of his working, and with great humility and modesty. I must at the very outset thank Professor Yusuf Sahab for giving me this opportunity to come back to department for this day and for his important academic initiatives that's getting reflected through this journal which he has started. We have had several meetings even before this without, talking about this lecture also. I know he's really very, very passionate, very keen that the department should come up, the students should benefit, university should get more and more reputation outside. He's always very keen about it. I deserve your attention because it's after a long time. Don't consider me as a guest because, as I said, 75 to 77 batch, I did my MA here. The building was L building there, which later was perhaps destroyed for renewal or whatever happened. Then we moved to this department. I think in the same building, history department was located. And there I taught for 2 years. After that, I left, completed my PhD, went to Northeastern Hill University, Shillong, where I started my career again. After that, I came back to JNU, and our friends and brothers like Professor Noor Saab, who was very highly reputed in political science there. Everybody knew, all teachers used to, talk very high of him, in fact. And these are the ones who further encouraged me that time there. I can tell you, with him I had a very special association, and also with the late Ghulam Qadir Wani, peace be on his soul also. In fact, when we talk about Professor Zindalal Jala, I think Professor Yusuf Saab has perhaps done some survey very intelligently to ask me to deliver this lecture because even his family was not as close to him, I would say, and did not spend as much time with him as I did. Because I rented a room in Salinu, Rambagh, when I came from my village Hangloo to do my MA in this university. And then after Jala Sahab picked me, he said, no, that's a far off place. You keep your things there, but you come and stay with me. I'll also have a company. Then I discovered that Jala Sahab's wife was already dead by then. After another 3 years, his daughter died. Then he had his son and himself. Let me give you some details before here. He said something bad happened always. We Kashmiris have inhibitions. And he said that now let us pack all this research material, which was in almost a truckload of it in his house in Ranawari. And he asked his Nepali servant that when we come back, you tag the whole material, because whenever I touch, something bad happens. That was his inhibition. So I thought, if I tell him right now, sir, you should continue with it. He was in a very, very bad shape, and his young daughter, not more than I think 32 years old, with leaving behind 3 children. After 16 days, again I took courage and I said, now people have left, this condolence atmosphere is over. I think we should spend time and you continue with this and all. And he slowly, again and again, agreed. I will tell you many, many interesting incidents that we Kashmiris sometimes, because of modernization, other things, we really leave those things aside. But I have seen those miracles happening, in fact, along with Jala Sahib and so on. To me, he was virtually like a real guardian, I would say. Professor Yusuf Sahib has given you some of the details. There is no need to repeat that effort, but let me also mention it here. Professor Zindalal Jala, to whose memory this lecture is dedicated, was a great human being. Apart from being a very reputed historian, he passed his matriculation, as was informed to you already, in 1941, and did his bachelor's in 1943 from university, which was college which was affiliated to Punjab University, Lahore, those days. In 48, he did his master's from DAV College, Srinagar, again Punjab University, Lahore. He did master's in economics in 1956. He was registered for PhD with late Professor G.S. Chhabra of Jammu University in Jammu. But Professor Chhabra died, and since partition of the university had taken place and Professor Jala had sought place here, so it was very difficult, because let me tell you an interesting case of Professor Jala Sahib. Professor Jala Sahib was down with accident after teaching in Shamlal College, Shahadra in Delhi, when he was a young man. When he was on the bed with that accident and treatment was going on, it was that time that his wife died in Kashmir. So you can well imagine the agony of a person. Therefore, he shifted from Jammu University, since he was teaching here, and continued here. He had also, because of that accident, he had a personal handicap, which he would never talk about, and did not give a feeling that he is really less than anybody physically, in terms of every day walking more than a kilometer within the university, outside, and so on. I have had the occasion to know him very personally and have spent more time with him than perhaps any of other family members. He was a great admirer of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. This is reflected from his correspondence with various politicians and prime ministers of India. Apart from classroom teaching and research in department, he spent long hours at home. As Professor Yusuf Sahib said, he spent long hours at home discussing history and its complex aspects. I had the great fortune of having learned many things in his company and met many senior people of history and stature who used to meet him in connection with research about Kashmir University, Kashmir history and culture of this region. It's at his residence that I had free access to writings of many Indian historians and foreign historians. It is there that I first time heard that there's a historian like Toynbee, that there is a historian like Spangler, and very personal readings of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru's work and the books that he has written. He took me along to Jammu in 2 winters and would guide me into various libraries and depositories. In my final year MA, I was asked to do a dissertation if I had interested plan to do research. And those days, Professor Muhammad Yasin, who happened to be head of department, he said, you have to work under me and you have to work on Muhammaddin folk. When he said Muhammaddin folk, I thought it could be somebody from UP or somewhere. I don't know who is Muhammaddin folk. I speedily came to library here and looked into various books and other things. I did not find any book pertaining to Mohammedan folk. Rushed to archives. There was Professor Hassan used to be director, and Professor Ramkishan Kohl, assistant director, gazetteers, and Professor Mohideen Saab. Sat with them. They said, yes, Mohammedan folk will give you some literature and so on. Ultimately, I was not satisfied, and I went to trace his village in Sopore area. I am forgetting the exact name of that, Sohibug or some other village, and met one of his cousins, Muhammad Abdullah. The family has produced a bureaucrat called, he was a very famous case officer. Again, I forget his name. Very bright chap, in fact. Spent night in that house, and they gave me 7 books. Finally, when Jala Sahab took me to Jammu and other places, I collected exactly 112 books of folk and did a dissertation. Your late Vice Chancellor, who was a professor of Jamia of Islamic Studies, Mushirul Haq Sahab, he was the person whom Professor Yasin invited to conduct my viva for the dissertation. I still remember Professor Haq coming with a Rumi topi with a tag here for that viva here in the campus. One of the wonderful persons who encouraged me in that interview, that I must continue my research. In fact, before everybody, I request, I have earlier through papers also, writings also told the Kashmir government, Vice Chancellors of Kashmir University, I again request all of you that kindly impress upon the entire community that there should be a memorial lecture or one building at least named after Mohammedan folk. It is Mohammedan folk who said in 1912 that I wish in my region there is a university. There is a university something like called Kashmir University. And we have forgotten such intellectuals. So it was in that connection that he took me to Jammu to guide me into various libraries and depositories. I have found memories of my association with Professor Jala. One winter during his visit to Timarpur, Delhi, he informed me and visited me in JNU and stayed with me in hostel for a couple of days with all inconvenience. And when I took him to CHS, he made it a point to meet all teachers there. He had an hour-long discussion about trends in historiography with late Professor Sarupalli Gopal, the son of President Radhakrishnan, who was chairperson of Center for Historical Studies at that point of time, with Professor Harbans Mukhya and with Professor Sabisachi Bhattacharya. Professor Jala Sahab was a mine of information and a great visionary. He had immense knowledge and understanding of methodology in history particularly. Although his research interests included the socio-economic conditions of Kashmir under Dogra rule with special reference to the period from 1846 to 1885, but the whole world was his broad area. Apart from teaching, he saw as his job to untangle the complex issues confronting Kashmiri society. While teaching or guiding research, he used the power of theory to awaken his students to what was happening in society and politics of those times. I have met Mufti Jalaluddin, late Mufti Jalaluddin Sahab at his residence, and have learned lots of things when Mufti Jalaluddin Sahab was talking about Sheikh Abdullah as a child, Sheikh Abdullah as in college, and many other great leaders of his times, for hours and hours together at his residence. Lot of people, in fact, from city used to come from all walks of life. While teaching or guiding research, he used the power of theory to awaken his students to what was happening in society and politics of his times. As a historian, he was always bothered about overall social, economic, politico-administrative system which defined accesses to resources in towns and villages. Teaching modern Europe always remained an intellectual consideration of Professor Jala Sahab. He always had in mind philosophically a strong echo of historical circumstances leading to world wars, which would get reflected during his teaching too. This is clear from his writings. He wrote, so far as I know, at that point of time, I think he had written 3 articles only, which were very, very profound. Crisis and History was the title of the series that he wrote, which was published in the Journal of University of Jammu and Kashmir, volume 3rd, I quote number 6 and page 7, in fact, page 1st, wherein he mentions, in fact, He says, he says, first half of century saw 2 world wars, but the last quarter of it has registered 3 big leaps in the field of science and technology, from conventional fuel to atomic energy, second from atomic power to space, third from Earth to moon and outer space. These achievements has given to this visibly short span of time the awe and preponderance of 3 ages. I unquote. As a historian, he avoided religious discussions but had great patience to listen to miracles that stemmed from spiritual activities. I have not seen him like a general Bhattar, general Pandit, doing this puja, doing that puja, doing, other pujas. He would believe in spirituality, but not in any religion, I tell you. That's how I knew him for nearly 10 years. I was very close to him. Yeah. Given Professor Jala Saab's firm views on necessity for empirical and theoretical research into social and political problems and his scorn for mere phrase-mongering of all too philosophical kind, his position could hardly be otherwise. He did not react in general terms to various questions confronting society at that time, but he did suggest a contrast between different situations, providing examples and counterexamples. He would reject spurious appeals to time, redefinition, and circularity, since he aimed in his work as a historian to have meticulous regard for facts that would help supporting any assertion with good argument and reliable testimony. There are so many memories associated with my relationship as a student with Professor Jala Saab that it will take hours to narrate them. It's a significant question as to how many genuine examples it would take us in order to characterize him as a historian. Perhaps we shall return to that later in life, making this grand beginning. However, his perspective, his perseverance and fortitude will always be remembered, as his contribution to department is always immense. Scores of students, including myself, benefited from his knowledge and experience. I am reminded of Sir Muhammad Iqbal when he says, मुझे इकबाल इस सैयद के घर से फैज़ पहुँचा है जो इसके दामन में वही कुछ बन के निकले. When we come to the memorial lecture is basically our composite culture. What is Kashmir's composite culture? How did that composite culture evolve? What does Kashmiri literature of different ages, perceive about composite culture? And then where we are today. So let me start with that. The greatest pleasure in presenting my views before all of you is that I have been the student of this department from 75 to 77 batch. Let me tell you that at the very outset, although Kashmiris were the first to produce the art of history writing and historians, but it's very difficult to speak about Kashmir's history these days for reasons well known to all of us. We have a history at social networks. We have anybody writing, whatever comes to his mind on Facebook, what is up, and spread the confusion. Because we are living in an age where there is truth, there is post-truth, there is alternate truth, there is a weaker truth, there is a stronger truth. But in all these truths, in fact, depends on how strongly you lie. That is the truth of today. Be it Indian politics, be it Indian academics. This is what has happened. Because in the domain of historian, many more people have landed who claim to be, the authentic soothsayers. I'll come back to it at the end. The region of Kashmir has a very long and authentic history of its own. Nature has endowed it with such geophysical attributes that many call it heaven. While many Kashmiris, particularly the ones in and out, who are resourceless, and crisis ridden in the recent past, it has also assumed the characteristics of living hell. I am reminded here also of Faiz Ahmed Faiz, who says, इतने गांव हैं कि जिस सिम्मत से नजर जाती है जाबजा नूर ने एक जाल सा बुना रखा है. All of us are held up in that. When we talk of composite culture in Kashmir, we must remember that both these items, the compositeness and culture, are made up of varied elements. It has taken centuries for this composite culture of Kashmir to evolve and reach to a particular stage. The variants of culture which we have in Kashmir are also material culture. We have popular culture, we have elite culture, we have subordinate culture, we have dominant culture, and we have one of the important things, that is spiritual culture. I am not intentionally bringing in the great historians like Peter Burke, who wrote the classic on popular culture, or Raymond Williams, an important person who wrote on culture, to assist me in this discussion. Spiritual culture to me in Kashmir means the mystical abstract, idealist, orienting more towards man than external world. A deeper level of thinking about himself rather than material world is spiritual culture. By interacting with others, by depending on their association and mutual assistance in material and other pursuits, every Kashmiri lengthens his own consciousness and enriches it, and expands it with knowledge and cognition of the surroundings. He develops his relations with the world around him artistically and aesthetically. That is what makes his progress limitless, which is what we designate as composite culture. A close connection among people and mutual dependence and understanding was the real basis for compositeness of the community as well. This was profound and organic in every Kashmiri settlement, in villages, in towns, in small places where multiple religious identities existed. The real solidarism was found there. This is why we found communal tendencies if you look at all over India, because Kashmir was a small place. Look at the communal rights from 47 onwards, leave the partition aside. Every communal right has taken place in urban areas, be it Muradabad, be it Aligarh, be it Meerut, be it Calcutta, mostly, and rural areas it has not taken place. Kashmir entire, even though we had a Srinagar city, I would still say that it was a small town compared to rest of the country or other countries in South Asia. We Kashmiris bewail the loss of soul and violation of spirit and long for spiritual warmth always. All of us. And that is one of the important bond, between people. Composite culture is based on this divine perfection. It strengthens genuine human fellowship. That does not entertain religious or other boundaries. And yet, it does not disallow you to be a good Muslim, to be a good Hindu, to be a good Sikh, to be a good Christian or good Jew. It never, stops person from doing that. There are many people, in fact, who were not literate in terms of modern literacy. But they have written great classics. I said when I was delivering a Sir Said memorial lecture at Aligarh 2-3 years back, I was telling them that the problem is Kashmiris did not have much exposition. But we have poets who are far more superior to Tagore and other even Nobel laureates, I tell you. I am quoting here Aziz Darwish. And Aziz Darwish says, I have tried to translate it, "Miracle thyself and make of it a bridge to span this ocean wide, across attain the annihilation in the divine. Where there is no Hindu, there is no Muslim." That's what Aziz Darwish says. Oh dear, oh hear that song sweet. Aziz Muth has gone crazy, that's what he says. He is letting out love secret among his fellow men. He has heard it from pious men and saints. I just want to tell you one thing here, in fact, that it requires a lot of more research, though I have seen Professor Ganai has been promoting research very rigorously. Kashmir is the only place, this is the only place we have, leaving aside a couple of Bhakti poets where there is a lot of confusion also prevailing. But we find the only place where there is a loving relationship with the God, with the unseen God. And this loving, you go to Central Asia, almost I have countries, most of the countries in the world, South Asia, Central Asia, Europe, Eastern Europe, even as far as Argentina and other places. I found here this is the only place where our poets, our Sufi poets, have expressed their faith through love with the Almighty. If you look at the words being used by them, Ashk Sundar, Mot Janan, there are many other terms that they are using. So many other items there which defines their loving relationship with the God, in fact. And this is our regional specificity and superiority. We'll come to that, in fact, in a moment. We must remember that culture spreads through literature, through folklore, through fairy tales, through cultural images, use of metaphors, and things from these inevitably emerge new, and from these things inevitably emerge new concepts and images that hold a community together. Habibullah Nausheri says, Krohduri mohtir ditnam dair dairi. Ruzai kerit nirit go. Firit vushnas lagas pair pari. Dishit travnam parizan. Look at the last word, Dishit travnam parizan. This is very, very, the new literary genre that was produced by them is a great philosophical understanding for self and separate, which they have provided to us. While doing so, these Sufi poets and great spiritual masters, they believed in super-awakening of self. The scriptural part of religion was generally ignored. I tell you, this I must tell. You see, I come from a village. I have written it also, where we had Hindu, and I think one of such villages where Hindu and Muslim houses were intertwined. And my exposition to mosque was the mosque of Khalid Khan. Khalid Khan was a tailor, and his murshid was called Jalsab. All Hindus used to go whenever they were sick, including myself. I was also taken by my mother to Jalsab to give the blessings. A great spiritual saint in that area. And then we would see Khalik Sahab would recite his namaz there. He was the only person who would go to that mosque and then lock it and disallow others. He would not allow others to share that mosque. And if I survey the entire area that time, entire from district Anantnag upwards, nobody had Hindu religious scripture in house. These are late developments. While doing so, they believed in super awakening of self, where scriptural part of religion was generally ignored. It was not intentionally ignored, it was not available also, I would say. Such absolutistic and theistic views were also reinforced by Kashmiri Sufi poets from time to time to hold society together and promote composite culture. The deep philosophical overtones of this poetry provided the scope for people to connect with reality and thus upgrade their sense of sharing and seeking truth. Like Mahmud Gami saying, Suratan mane tabir khabas, mushukzan milit gulabas sۭtۍ, voiceless nishjai chheni kehna kabas, rindshuk zindakat abas sۭtۍ. You get a great philosopher from South, great philosopher from anywhere, from the world, and ask him to decode, unless he understands the region's religion and philosophy and understanding of this culture, he cannot decode the poetry. And we have opportunities to go ahead with this. It is this way that heretical spiritual culture was used to mediate between absolute and finite intelligence within Kashmir for centuries. In this process, the mediation of multiple meanings of words connected to multiple literary, regional and cultural genre are noticed in Kashmiri literature, which is specific and richness of the composite culture. I would tell you, you go to Tbilisi, Georgia. Group from Georgia, you can go to Iran also through Firuza. You can go to Ankara also from Georgia, from Stalin's village, if you travel few kilometers, because the solutions to society emanate from universities. University is not simply to do classroom teaching, it is university which has to provide solutions to the problems of injustice in human society. That's what I feel as a historian. The various changes facilitated in the region are sometimes misinterpreted, intentionally or otherwise, and they have seriously interfered with the region's history, polity, social processes. Our Kashmir's history specificity is that the greatest men may make large machinery, but for a blade of grass to grow requires the divine mystic power. You should empathy. Physics, science, sorry came per it. I was asking an agricultural scientist, tell me, are you sure if we grow 10 seeds of paddy, if we sow them, 10 will come? He said it has never happened in life. It is Allah's blessing ultimately. Either 9 will grow or 11 will grow out of 10. So therefore, ये significant चीज जो कश्मीर में ज़्यादा पाना dominate करा. और चुनिए. This power can only when our region's environment is maintained in its specific space, shape, peace and harmony. Obviously, people should not be blamed for fate of politics. It is political players themselves who short-sighted policies subject region's composite culture to systematic brutalization and serious neglect for their individual purposes, personal gains. History teaches us that its prejudicial accumulation represents a worse threat to intervals of political stability and social security in Kashmir. Basically, since our fate is staggered to Indian state, let me just conclude here. Indian state should now no more be obsessed with the national or nationalistic nostalgia. Notionally, but it should accept the fact that India's civilization nation. In my writings, I have never said Indian nation, not only here, any writing that I did for all my 40-50 years of career. I have never agreed with the idea that we are a nation. It's a civilizational nation. You compare it with different nations. French are a nation. Nobody speaks other than French. Germans are a nation. Muscovites are a nation, even though they are dreaming of building empire and so on. But even that also, if you look at the kind of nation that they had, you go to any of the khanates which was occupied by Russia earlier, they all speak one language. So we are a civilization. We are not a nation. We are a civilization which cannot be perceived simply by tidy sectoral or geographically demarcated boundaries, but by promoting inter-regional understanding, interconnections among and across the states. The complexity of interrelatedness and issues and their cumulative and other unforeseen consequences demand for a greater approach to Kashmir problem than existing system of institutions can correspond to. The Indian state saw itself as the champion of nationalism in Kashmir too. You guys, Hafiz Jalandhari Sund Parun poem, I have quoted that in my book. You must read that. How relevant that is today. The Indian state saw itself as a champion of nationalism in Kashmir and refused to view other problems of region as an impediment to resolution of political problem from very inception of Nehruvian era. Unfortunately, today, the zone of overlap in Kashmir's problems and policy prescriptions is significantly larger than it was earlier. For giving a peaceful Kashmir to our present and future generations, the intellectuals and politicians have a role to play with much more seriousness than they have displayed in their silence and sometimes duplicity respectively. Be they politicians or others who claim to be the forerunners, history will never excuse them for playing with the public sentiments. By using sectarian or communal ideas and institutions, the difference of opinion among political parties and intellectuals in Kashmir is lifeblood for any meaningful step forward in running better affairs of the state. But to ignore the fact that public opinion in Kashmir regarding region's relationship with the rest of the country remains as odious, divided, complex as it was in 47, it is malignant tumor in politics that both the regional and national politicians cannot leave unattended any longer. We may say Article 370 go khatma, isko problem solved. No, you come and listen to us and see what are the problems here. You have solved your problem, but our problem has not been solved. We Kashmiris may have varied objectives and aspirations in mind, but let us situate them in the light of viability of our Kashmir's geophysical character, the establishment of rule of law, the growth of democratic norms and institutions, and the role that the global market economy is going to assume in future in our region. I have always said that contemporary polity in a civilized society of Kashmir demands that we need to reconstruct public opinion, strengthen it, offer effective solutions, and remove the confusion in people's mind once for all. Kashmir politics should not be totally at odds with what is practicable. All political parties have a set of men in their leadership full of zeal and determination, but they need to feel for the sufferings of people. They have all been trying, our politicians, to go nearer to power. We don't want that. We want the politicians to transform power for the betterment of Kashmiris. That is the last point I want to make. When I say we, I mean we all Kashmiris. I am not saying KPs or Muslims separately, Sikhs separately. I am saying we all Kashmiris. I have written a poetry from my poem. I want just, with your permission, 2 lines to convey. पूरे आलम में हुए बदनाम जाकर अब भी रोको तो रहमत होगी, जो तबाही मच गई है अब तक फिर संवारेंगे जब भी फुर्सत होगी, फिर से बुनियाद डालो ऐसे घर की, अपनी भी एक ऊंची इमारत होगी. Thank you all. I thank you all for your attention.